Okay, hello everybody. We are live with episode 2 of the CMA panel, and this is the Americas version. So, welcome everybody to the live stream. As more people join, we'll be able to start taking questions. Oh, looks like we've got Will coming in as well. Hey, Will.
Hey.
Hey,
All
Will.
right. So, as we get going, we'll just cover a brief introduction on who everybody is. So, Chris New, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, Chris New. I actually was in the CMA panel with Mr. Will Coffey, so we know each other pretty well. We were in the second cohort to go through this, so we've been CMAs for quite a while now. My career path, so I started as a customer back in the day a long time ago. Went over to ServiceNow and spent 7 years at ServiceNow. Did architect work, did hands-on development work. Eventually found my way over here to New Rocket where I'm at now, and I'm the director of architecture, pretty much flowing everything architecture that comes through this company pretty much tries to flow through me. So that's a lot of bit about me. I don't know if you want me to pass it or if you want me to just give it back to you, but I was going to force Mr. Will Coffey, who came in late, to go next.
Sure, go ahead. That's fine.
Yeah, I was still on time. I just slid right in at the last second there.
That's true.
But I'm Will Coffey. I work for Accenture Federal. So I focus primarily on the U.S. government side of the things that we do. I've been a CMA since 2020 with Chris. We were both in the same cohort. We both took our boards at the same time down in Orlando. But my background is I started with ServiceNow in 2015. Before that, I was an IT director and did a lot of LAN things and infrastructure and cloud stuff. So shifting to the platform where we were developing on top of it instead of just hosting the things that got developed was a little bit of a change for me. Before that, I was in the Marine Corps. You probably see all my cool stuff, my props here in the background. But, I've been doing ServiceNow stuff since 2015 and worked across a lot of the different parts of the platform that we have in there. But primarily recently, I've been focusing a lot on IRM, GRC, and SecOps and those fun things that nobody likes to talk about.
Well, we'll dive deeper into that in a bit. Tej, go ahead.
Yeah, so nice to be here with all you folks. So my name is Tej Hemantraj. I live in New Jersey on the East Coast, and besides being a CMA, which I graduated in 2021, I lead the ServiceNow technical practice for Fujitsu North America, and the primary focus is on innovation, providing subject matter expertise, product offerings, customer advisory, and really helping customers in their ServiceNow journey. And going back to my experience, I've been doing ServiceNow for almost 13 years now. I started back in 2011. And I'm also hands-on with a few large enterprise customers, helping them with any recommendations, solutions, roadmap, or sometimes in some capacity, even development.
Oh, that's great. Also wanted to call out, you're the only one in the hat, Will. Love it. I do have one of them. So, yeah, they are quite nice. So we'd like to just kind of start by discussing maybe a recent integration, because that's the topic of today's panel. And then once we get through these recent discussions, we've got questions. So feel free, if you're on the stream, to type in a question, and we'll do our best to answer it. So Tej, why don't we go in reverse order and start with you for a recent integration?
Yeah, I think I work on a lot of integrations, but the one that is most recent is with the Cisco vManage, right? So we have a large enterprise customer that's looking to do a little bit of a POC to monitor their networking infrastructure. And of all the various solutions that they're looking at, Cisco vManage was one of them. And I think in terms of the challenges that we are seeing, because this is something that we are still working on as a POC, is right now, if you look at vManage, they don't have a definitive way in terms of sending over the payload. And usually, when we work on many ServiceNow integrations, we expect the application, the third-party application, to have a certain form of a payload or a data structure through which we are able to bring in information, right? So that you're able to at least build out a specific integration or a specific code where you're able to actually do or develop that entire integration end to end. But the challenge that we saw with vManage was there were so many different parameters and so many different areas or segments that, as soon as, let's say, it monitors an alert or measuring a particular threshold, it used to send out those alerts either over email or as an endpoint. So the approach going into this, what we took is we try to develop a REST endpoint where Cisco vManage is able to send over that information across the different payloads, and then we have to construct an intermediary table that initially brings in all of those alert responses, and you could say it's kind of massaging the data or trying to make sure that we put it in a certain format before we feed it into the incident process. And then we had an additional logic as well to make sure that if we repeatedly get any incidents, repeatedly get any alerts, then we are encompassing some of those into this incident management process as well. And you might ask the obvious question, why are we not using event management? Well, the customer is not licensed here for event management, and that's something that's in the pipeline for them. But at least we wanted to come up with one solution that is able to look into all of the different formats of the payload, and then also retain, kind of the same process without changing much of it on the incident management side. Because if you use, let's say, the table API, the challenge that I see is there is less control in terms of the priority that you set, the CIs, and quite a bit of other information. And the customer here has specific controls, which allows you to create specific SLAs as well. So that's kind of, going into the details. I can provide more insight.
Yeah.
But, I think at a high level, this is what sharing from my recent experience.
I mean, that is intricate and excellent. So thanks for diving into those details. I definitely want to drill down a little further in some of them. But let's go to Will now. What's a recent integration you've either built or updated?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things that we work on pretty regularly, but for one of our customers, we recently just did a whole slew of, like I was talking about earlier, our security operations integrations. One of the primary ones that we have done a lot of is the Tenable integrations, and that's because when you get into the federal government, a lot of the times that they're looking at their environment, they're doing their scans. It's usually a super manual process to have to go through and sort what have they scanned, what have they found on what systems, and then how are they managing their vulnerabilities and vulnerable items and all those things as they go through and look for a mitigation path. But vulnerability management on the ServiceNow platform allows you to integrate those Tenable items in there, and that gives you a couple of benefits. One, it allows you to bring those things in to be worked into the platform, but two, it also can act as a source of discovery for the systems that you have out there in your environment, so that you can take that and correlate that to the systems in your CMDB and use that to associate to different services and things. But realistically, when we look at how we're bringing in those vulnerabilities and vulnerable items, there's a lot of work that goes into dissecting those, because the integration itself is not that tough, right? Because there's an out-of-the-box integration that goes with Tenable, and when you're looking at Tenable SC and you're looking at how we're bringing those vulnerabilities in, that's not the tough part. The tough part is really understanding how you want to handle those vulnerabilities as they come in, because sometimes there's exceptions, sometimes they are managed differently because they are a different priority or different impact on things. And you can set it up so that there are conditional rules that when you bring in those vulnerabilities, you can do different things with different part of the workflows before it gets to things like a POAM or some kind of issue as they are handled on the platform. So when we look at those pieces, those Tenable integrations, they're even though it's a common thing, like it can get pretty dicey, because you're looking at not only how are you handling managing the systems from a CMDB standpoint and reconciling that information there. And I'm not even going to get into CMDB stuff with data deduplication and data cloning and stuff, but making sure that your vulnerabilities and vulnerable items as you scan and rescan aren't showing up and duplicating and flooding that way is something that we're also. So I mean, that's just one. We actually did like 28 different integrations across all different kinds of tools. I actually pulled up my report so I could count what we did on there. But when you're those vulnerable items, those vulnerabilities, and that tenable integration is, I think it's super important, right? And a lot of companies, even if it's not a federal customer, because a lot of people are using Tenable and they're using Nessus to scan on those things, can use that vulnerability management to get in there. And then that kind of breaks into things like, how are you cutting across the different records for security operations, security incidents, ITSM incidents, changes, whatever you're going to do for remediating or mitigating those things, and then making sure that you have a lot of the platform. It's not really an integration, but an integration of those records that you're able to see the whole life cycle of everything that happens once you pull those things in from Tenable. So that's my most recent story, outside of just like multi-factor authentication, which isn't as cool as the Tenable story, but
yeah, that's fair. Okay, Chris, your latest integration that you've built or updated.
Yeah, no, thank you. So, first of all, a little bit of background. So, when I was at ServiceNow, one of the things that I worked on there, so I was on the creator workflow team. Creator workflow meaning pretty much anything that's customization type capabilities with the tool. So, your service portals, your custom app dev, and your integrations. So, I actually built the best practice for ServiceNow while I was in there. Have a huge slide deck. Anybody ever interested in looking at my best practice slide deck that I used and built there, let me know. I'll send it over.
Yeah.
Sharing
is caring, Chris.
Yes, of course. So my two, I've got actually two examples. And the reason I'm going to give you two examples is because neither one of them are finished yet, but they're things that are processing through my mind constantly on a day-to-day basis. I mean, as you know, when we start building stuff, your mind just sits there in circles and tries to figure out what's the best next step. So number one, and this one actually came to mind because Tej, one of the ones you were talking about, customer not having event management and trying to build some solution to help you with that. So I have a customer that came to me, hey, we don't want to spend the money on discovery, but we need our CMDB items in there. Common ask. We're all used to that. But the interesting fact was the tool they asked me to integrate with. So they said, hey, we want to integrate with Qualys. And I said, isn't that a security system? I mean, that's what we use for security. So I got real confused. But luckily, they put us in touch with their Qualys team. We started looking at it. We started understanding how the CIs were built into there. So now we're actually looking at, there's a couple store apps out there. There's a bi-directional store app, but there's also just a plain sync one-directional store app. So the interesting thing that we just ran into recently was the bi-directional requires discovery plugin. And so we were like, well, we can't use that one. So it was like a big hit on us. So we just found that out this week, and we're trying to shift to the unidirectional one, which is kind of good for us because they just need data in. They don't need the data back out. So we're processing it that way. The other integration I wanted to talk about, and the reason I wanted to is because this one's really cool and unique because I've never had this ask come, but now that I'm on the other side and not a ServiceNow employee, I'm a partner now, and ServiceNow actually came to us and asked us to build a spoke for them for, I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it's FIS. It's an IBM tool. So we were asked to build the spoke so that it can be reused by multiple customers. Now, this is my first experience with putting together, building a spoke with ServiceNow that'll be reused by multiple people. Now, needless to say, has it been an experience? It has been a huge experience. So first of all, the work was started by somebody else. So there's already some work in place that we had to go into and first of all, understand what it was doing, how it was operating. And now we're trying to rebuild it. And the interesting part is during this whole process, we're trying to get this done for a customer that wants it. And so we're trying to build requirements where we don't have requirements yet because the spoke's not published. So it's been a complicated, probably the most complicated integration work I've ever had to be a part of in my life. Learn somebody else's work, try to get this ready for a customer who's the spoke's not ready. And so the publishing process, not to mention when you go to do this with ServiceNow, they give you this big document that says, this is how you do this, and you have to follow all these standards or we're not going to publish this. So it's been a unique experience, but it's been pretty cool. And so when you do see the FIS spoke out there, I want everybody to go out there and go, hey, that was Chris and all them. They helped build that. And just remember my name there.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and exciting to to work with ServiceNow while you're outside of ServiceNow. That's very cool. We do have a question from Steele Smith, and we'll get to that right after I kind of talk about my latest integration. We're right in the middle of it, but this is an in-flight existing integration that already has a lot of data in production. It's for a law firm, and they have their clients and their matters stored in an external system. And the original integration was only pulling in active ones. So sometimes a client it becomes closed, or the matter becomes closed, and then there's all these children records after that. So we had to update not only the database query that we were pulling, but also the integration needed to go through and close everything first, and then only update the integrated ones that have been closed in the last month. So it's been an interesting journey, a lot of data wiping in dev and then reloading, testing, getting all of this stuff right, looking at these import set logs. So it's been an interesting journey, especially because we only get one chance to get it right in production, and we don't want to have to restore anything because there's hundreds of thousands of records that we're dealing with here. So let's get to the first one. The first question we have is from Steele Smith, and this is about Microsoft SCCM. So it's a very common integration. So they're looking for some tips on leading practices on configuring this integration. So why don't we start with Will on that one?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of different ways that you can approach that right out of the bat, right? I think, looking at SCCM, because it's one of those common connectors, the first thing that you can look at is, what are you trying to pull in? What are you trying to manage with that? And what version of SCCM are you trying to pull in on those things? The other part of that is, there's some service graph connectors for that you have that you can leverage that help you quickly kind of assimilate into the SCCM environment. The challenge with some of those things, especially when it comes to the Microsoft environment, is that they're constantly updating their entire connector set and how the data is organized, how it's put together, what the structure of that data is, and what database it's going into. And you have to really look at a forward look on that, and you're understanding which version of SCCM that you're tapping into, to understand, is this going to be around for a minute, or do I have to really adjust for a future look on those things? Because if you're doing that work to hook in that service graph connector, and you're making sure that you have the work there for some of the legacy SCCM integrations, and the data sources change because they move to a newer version of those things, then that transformation for how it comes out of SCCM and into ServiceNow is a little bit trickier when it comes to setting up those filters for those things. But I would really encourage people that when you're doing those things, that, making sure that you understand where your source tables are, and knowing how you're pulling those into your platform, and making sure that you have those things set so that you have those features on both sides. It's going to be really important, because that table structure for how you're managing across both SCCM and within ServiceNow, and then how you're relating that to your users, and then the environment, the CIs and CMDB pieces that's within that thing is going to be, it can be a little bit tricky and messy if you don't have that set appropriately. That's kind of like my high level view. I don't want to take up all the time on those pieces, but I don't know, Chris or Tej or
No, that's perfect. I like that you kind of highlighted to the service graph piece, because that is now the latest recommendation. And I know a lot of clients are, updating their integrations to service graph. So that can be quite the journey in itself. But those are also great opportunities for you to update the integration to reflect the current needs of the business. So you're already in there going to the latest and greatest technology, best practices, and you can also update the functionality associated with it. I think Tej did want to add in some other points as well. So go ahead, Tej. Oh, I think you muted, Tej. Hold on, let me.
Yeah, can you?
There you go. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think Will brought up a really good point about the version of the SCCM. I think that's actually key. And I think, Microsoft came up with MECM, which is just a new name for SCCM, really. But one of the factors is, of course, to consider the Service Graph connector, especially if you're integrating into ServiceNow. And then the other point is also to look at the quality of the data in SCCM. So, of most of the implementations that we have done, one of the things that we have seen is sometimes the asset management teams, when they put in data into SCCM, oftentimes they miss or they don't have a governance process around having an effective way to manage their SCCM data and how it gets into that system. Because whatever you're going to get it in SCCM is the same thing that's going to feed into ServiceNow. And oftentimes we see that challenges where be it the manufacturer names or the model names or the display numbers or the tag numbers, they don't come in the right format. Right, so we had a lot of back and forth looking into the transform maps and so on. So I think that's one key thing to consider as well. And also on the ServiceNow side, it's best to have normalization enabled, because that will take care of all of your varying manufacturer names. And maybe you'll have to manually key in some different variations depending upon the quality of SCCM. But if you don't have hardware asset management, for example, then if you're just looking at ITAM, then having normalization enabled early on will help out quite a bit.
Excellent. Okay, let's move into Marcos question, or a question from Marcos. Sorry, about a release date for the FIS spoke. Or sorry, Chris, did you want to add in on this one?
So the only
Yeah.
things I would add in is, so remember, I talked about having a best practice for whenever we talk to, and I'm going to actually use the terminology still used, which is leading practice for integrations. So I will tell you that both of them hit the point that I would have brought up. First of all, is always try to start with something that has a pre-base. So that being the service graph connector. If there's a spoke available, always look to those first. That saves you time. It saves you effort. It gives you a starting point, and build off of that from there. So that would have been my main recommendation. The only other piece I would add into both of those, I actually think that SGC comes with this already pre-baked into there. If it doesn't, then, or if you do wind up building custom, always remember to include your IRE when anything you're dealing with CMDB.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Quick plug for CSDM on that, right? I think the service graph connectors kind of give you immediate compliance to that piece, but your CSDM framework is really going to be an important part of that, especially anytime you're dealing with anything CMDB and starting to relate those CIs and services to things, then definitely want to make sure you're making it organized that way.
Yep, standardized across the organization and being consistent across different teams. While it can be a big challenge to get everybody to agree, once you have that enterprise-wide alignment, things become much simpler and you really get those accelerated delivery timelines. So let's go back to that question from Marcos for Chris New. Do we have a potential release date? Is there an estimate for this FIS spoke? He would love to test it out.
Yeah, no, great question. I would love for you to test it out too. The one thing that I would say is I don't think we threw up any safe harbors here. So safe harbor, I don't think I can speak and give you a date because honestly, it's not me releasing the spoke at ServiceNow. We're just building it. I will tell you we're really close. There is going to be multiple iterations of this spoke coming out. So the first part, all it's going to be is lookups. That's all it's going to be handling. That's what we're building right now. Future state will start getting into the creates and the other actions that they're looking to build into there. So I do believe we're looking at maybe months, a few months, maybe a few weeks of it being out, but I can't speak to that again. I'm not the one that's actually going to officially say, boom, it's out there, but I'd be looking for it pretty soon.
That's great. And I do appreciate the safe harbor. So, there is the safe harbor notice for all of this content. But I do like that you kind of said they're starting with lookups first. So that's the ServiceNow drinking their own champagne philosophy where they're building that MVP and they're doing it themselves. And that's why they also recommend clients and partners out there and implementers use the same process because it works and it's the fastest way to start realizing value in production. Okay, we have another question from Marcos as well, which is great. Keep them coming. Asking, is there a better way of pulling more granular data from endpoints they've tried Service Graph Connector for Intune, but it's not that rich in data. So the other option was ACCV, but there's a struggle on deploying on all endpoints. So how do you balance the technology that you use when it comes to implementing and doing that decision? Tej, how about you take this one? Oh, I think you're muted, sir.
Again, sorry.
Oh, there we
Double.
go. No worries. That's all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
So I think looking at it, right, so we're talking about Intune that really brings in specific mobile device or specific asset related information. And I'm not sure if, ACCV would be a right fit, because usually I think recommendation around ACCV would be around more into the infrastructure element, where you have, let's say, critical infrastructure that needs more frequent monitoring. Then it would make more sense for you to deploy ACCV. But really, if not ACCV, then I think we'll have to look at what is the method you're using to bring in information into ServiceNow, right? Especially around Intune, because I think I need a little bit of more detail than that, because both are two different areas when we look at Intune and ACCV.
Okay. Yes, that's
Yeah.
great. So sometimes the question is, or the answer can be, it depends. And you'll notice that Tej kind of said what it depends on. We've all been on those frustrating calls where the architect says it depends and goes back on mute. And in my opinion, the quality ones say, what does it depend on? And give you those key factors to consider to enable you to make that informed decision, weighing pros and cons of both sides. Anybody else want to dive in on this
Yeah,
topic?
I was going to chime in. I mean, I think with a solution that you're looking at like that, not all the time is a Service Graph Connector going to meet your needs. Not all the time, and I actually think Intune in particular has a spoke available too outside of the. So you might have to explore multiple options. And here's the thing: just because there's these pre-built options doesn't mean either of them are going to meet what you're trying to do. That's why I think Tej hit the nail on the head, which is you have to really explore, what am I trying to achieve? I'm big into reading the notes around what the spokes or Service Graph Connectors are going to give me to align with what the customer is trying to do. If my customer says, hey, I specifically have to have this and it has to be this way, I look at the Service Graph Connector, I look at the spoke and say, can this do that? If it can't, will it be easy to layer in to that spoke that's already out there, or do I just need to start this from the ground up? So I think you really have to evaluate your use case, understand it, and then really build off of that. And Will, I think you were going to try to chime in too, so I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, you kind of brought up a thing earlier where you're using Qualys as an integration to do some of that work, right? So there's different ways to crack that nut. I'm always kind of leery of just jumping straight to Microsoft things, because Microsoft does Microsoft stuff pretty good. But even when you're looking at Intune or you're looking at Security Center or things, it's really focused on a Microsoft environment. So you couldn't fully rely on that unless you knew 100% that everything in your environment is going to be a Microsoft product, which is probably not. And so when you're looking at those outside integrations, if there's graph connectors or whatever, that's cool. But there's probably going to be integrations to other systems that you're going to look at for pulling some of that configuration data and some of that discovery of what's actually out there in your environment and what that is actually running on. So Chris's example of Qualys is a good one, because you can use that as a source of understanding and discovering what's out there in the environment and what the configuration of those pieces are. And there's other parts of the platform that do this. Right? ServiceNow is not meant to be panacea in those ways. It's not going to do everything for you, but it does help give you the accessibility to be able to find the things that pull into it and give you one place to go to get that information. So when you start pulling that in, if you've got your asset management pieces, your ITAM stuff, your SAM stuff, your HAM stuff, your configuration compliance stuff, your integrations with your other tools out there to help give you a more complete picture, that's really where you're going to have to be. I don't think there's going to be like one shot solution on those things. You're going to have to build a capability around that.
Yep. And how does that feed into like multi-sourced CMDB? How would you handle a strategy around that? I worked with one client a few years back that used Qualys, like you said, for CI discovery, but they also had discovery, and we had to set up, which ones were trusted more, which system for which field. And that really drove a lot of their work because they had these two competing business objectives. One, an up-to-date CMDB that was fully automated, and two, vulnerability. And in some cases, for a service, the vulnerability was much more important from a data perspective compared to what Discovery found. So they kind of had these prioritizations based on what services were influenced by that infrastructure. And then we had to make sure that the CSDM was fleshed out. And this is CSDM 3.0. So it's, that's dating. It's real. All this is gray and it's all earned. So Chris New, how would you handle that CMDB multi-source strategy?
Oh man. So, well, first of all, the number of times I've had to deal with multi-sources with the CMDB, and I'll actually give you even more unique scenario. I deal with domain separation a lot. I deal with customers that are coming in that have to link multiple CMDBs across multiple layers. So we talked earlier about interesting integrations we've all done, and so I'll bring up one right now because it kind of links to this multi-source. So I actually have one of our customers who they're an MSP for multiple customers, and their other customers actually work on their own ServiceNow instance. So it's kind of unique. It's not your standard typical, they handle everything in the ServiceNow instance that customers come into that. No, each customer has their own ServiceNow instance as well. And so we had to actually help build out some EBON solutions for them. So most of that EBONing was around your incidents, your problems, your requests. Well, recently they came to us and they were like, hey, we want CIs too. And we were like, wait, hold on, you want to EBON CIs across? And we were like really pounding our heads against the wall saying, how do you actually do this without impacting, number one, performance, number two, how that would work? And so we actually came up with a unique solution utilizing Snowflake. If anybody's ever heard of this Snowflake and what that does, it's pretty much like what you would consider a data lake, I guess is a good term for it, dumping data to it and then bringing that. The interesting thing with Snowflake that we ran into is it's great for, let me take my data out of ServiceNow and throw it into this system, but it's awful when it comes to taking that data and putting it back in. It just, the structure-wise, it doesn't work very well. And you can't do it with any kind of API calls. You have to utilize JDBC queries into the database. So we actually had to build this solution because we were easily dumping the data there. Now it was, how do we take that, get it in so that the customers can now see those CIs and understand them? And so the solution, it took us quite a while to build. We actually had to go through a couple of iterations because the first pass, we were running into some performance stuff. Hey, when you initially load, everything was just locking up, freezing, and then erroring out, and you weren't getting everything. So we had to go through multiple iterations of coming up with ways of slowing it down, having it do only subsets of data, and then waiting for that to finish, then going again. And so it took us quite a while to do it. And that's just a unique example that I don't think a lot of people might run into, because you don't typically hear of a MSP who the customers aren't actually working in their instance, they're working on their own instance. So it was a unique scenario, something we built for, but really cool to have to deal with.
Yeah, and e-bonding between two instances is a common use case. I know there is that out-of-the-box spoke, but I myself too have found that it didn't quite meet everything we needed. And with a prioritization on consolidation of the solution, meaning I wanted to have it all in a unified script include with common business rules and stuff to operate on, we ended up building it from the ground up as well for New Rocket for the managed services side. So it's interesting. We can share some notes on that later on, Chris.
Exactly. I think we've all probably heard in the past, don't ever EBON certain tables, and CMDB was typically one of them tables. Hey, don't EBON this. It's not going to be a good idea. And so we looked at, like, do we use IDR? Do we use the spoke? You brought up a great example. Do we build a custom integration? We looked at all those, and every one of them, it was a no, till we came to this Snowflake idea, and we're like, ooh, this may actually work. And sure enough, it wound up working for our use case.
That's super cool. So Tej, when you're looking at an integration strategy, customers come to you with a new need, how do you prioritize which options to implement? So, I mean, like, do you go to Integration Hub first? Do you look at maybe a third party? We've all seen that Atlassian in one on their port, downloading that XML. I know there's something in the store now, but back in the day, I mean, you've been in this for 13 years. We used to have to always install that. How do you prioritize that, and how do you weigh the key factors that influence your decision.
Yeah, I think the key point is understanding the source and target systems, right? So what the application is able to provide, and then what we have in ServiceNow. And then also next point is about the data, right? What data are we trying to pull in? That forms quite a bit of it. And also which process are you trying to align that with? Sometimes, especially with Jira, it can go several different ways in terms of how you want to integrate and where you want to use that particular integration. So looking at all of these aspects and how frequently you want to sync, then you would look into the first priority, which would be the service graph connectors if it's CMDB related, or integration hub connectors if it's something related to any of the data points. And then if you have nothing coming in from ServiceNow, I would lean on the third-party connectors to see if there's already a pre-baked solution that is already available with it, right? And then the last bit would be the custom integration. I know with ServiceNow you can do a REST. Preferred is REST, not SOAP, because SOAP is XML and it's quite difficult to maintain it. So the JSON REST is much more preferred. But you also have to take into factors like your technical debt. How much over a period of time is your team able to maintain and sustain that solution, right? And what if do you have a roadmap to say, let's say, if further down the line in 6 months or 1 year, if ServiceNow or the third-party system comes up with a spoke on their own, are you in a position to, let's say, maybe migrate to that new solution? So you also have to build your solution that is scalable, sustainable, and also easy to get rid of as well, as we speak. And I think those are the key pointers that I would keep in mind or recommend to my customers, Chris.
That's great.
Yeah.
So one of the next great questions from Marcos is about how do we maintain these integrations when we get into that operational state? And this, I find, long term becomes the largest cost, is that maintenance cost. How do we update it? How do we keep it running? How do we monitor it? Because in some cases, I've had to build integrations to monitor another integration and make sure that things are up and running. I always try to focus on making sure that a junior or a developer could maintain it because of the cost of having, an architect or a senior developer maintain it. This can be achieved through a lot of things, and we'll have Will take it from here.
Yeah. So one, when it comes to integrations, for me personally, I'm a big fan of the KISS method, right? I want to start with the simplest solution first. There's a lot of ways to do integrations. You can do SOAP, you can do REST, you can do service graph connectors, you can do out of the box, you can do marketplace, you can do JSON loads, you can go crazy. You can do pretty much whatever you want to do. I tell people all the time that the platform can integrate with pretty much anything. Some things are just harder to do than others, right? There's some stuff that just is naturally harder. So when it comes to documenting your integrations, one, it's important for you to know as an enterprise architect what you're connected to, because how your system is interconnected in the technology ecosystem is really going to dictate how you make architectural recommendations generally, because there's going to be considerations for things like security, data flows, data security, user visibility, access controls, all those things that you need to put in place. Plus, you also need to make sure that when you're doing integrations, you're taking into account things like, service accounts and stuff like that you have to maintain along with it. So I saw the question about maintaining that integration blueprint document, and if I have any good template examples. I mean, I've made a template, I feel like I've done this a dozen times, and there's never been one that fits the need of every single client that's out there. But I think when you're looking at how you are defining those integrations, one, it's important to know what integrations you have. And you can use things like your CMDB to manage those integrations, right? Because you can use the platform to help maintain itself. And then, of course, there's other things in there that talks about the types of integration that you have, integrations in the platform. You can go and view those pieces. But using that to understand what service accounts you have, what connections you have to what systems, what are the network paths that you're going to be looking at, what are the encryption pieces, certificate things that you're going to have to manage in there. All of those considerations that go in there, you should be able to use the platform to dictate and manage some of the information so that, like Chris was saying, when you have that junior developer come in, I don't have to go hunt for something in some shared document folder on a SharePoint site or in a shared server somewhere or in a Jira project or whatever. Like, you don't want to do that, right? You want to make it as easy as possible. Create knowledge articles. You can do it that way. That's a great way to do it. Anything that helps you easily access and maintain those pieces. I like the knowledge article piece because then you have version control. You understand what's been updated when it's been published, and you can bring those to the forefront if you need to have some kind of visibility only to the architects or developers and stuff, or you can decommission those things like if they're no longer relevant. So use that's at your fingertips to be able to manage those things. And I know that, Chris, you've done a ton of this stuff too, so I would definitely defer to you on that as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. New.
Yeah, so interesting enough, and I'll bring back up the FIS. So I mentioned that we took this over from somebody else. Now, you're talking about myself and a couple of other people that were on this that are seasoned integration guys, been doing this a while. But to pick something up from somebody and have nothing to go off of, if no notes in their code, nothing identifying what a piece of code is doing, nothing identifying what a flow. It's killer. It's hard, and you have to basically piece it together and start using your own mind. So maintenance and also that integration blueprint that you're talking about are critical, in my opinion, to help somebody in, say, my state, or even handing off to a customer. Once you leave, the customer is going to want to be able to understand the logic, what's going on, and be able to run with that. So one of the things at ServiceNow while I was there that they used to do is they had these things at the end of the projects that they would hand over to customers called architecture blueprints. Those blueprints would cover everything from what systems are connecting to and how they're connecting, what the security behind them are. So there was a lot built into there. What are the actions kicking off and going forth? What kicks off my integration? So those documents detailed that out. Do I have a template? Yes. Am I able to share it? Probably not, because it's ServiceNow owned, not mine. So I probably can't share it. But I also have some good stuff for maintaining inside of that best practice document I talked about, which I can share. So definitely anybody interested in that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share it. I do know that, be sure, as you heard me talking about that FIS piece and the complications, be sure you document your code. Help your fellow developers out. Be sure you put notes on your flow designer. Like, it doesn't take very long to go click that little pencil icon up there and then type in a note that says, this is what this action's doing. It's super simple, but it also helps somebody come in there. And I would critically say that that's a key piece to making sure your integrations, your flows are easily maintainable by anybody that's going in there, seasoned or not seasoned.
But keep in mind that a lot of us work in a multi-vendor environment, right? Especially as partners, we're going in there. It's never just, as much as I would love it to be just me, it's never just me. And there's always people coming in and doing work in there. So, Chris, you mentioned governance. Like, that should be part of your governance process, that this is how we do our development. We're commenting our code. We're making those notes, because it's not just helpful for you later. It's helpful for everybody else that's going to touch that stuff. The last thing you want is somebody coming in, changing the work that you've done because they don't really know what it does, breaking your stuff.
Yep. And code reviews were a big part of my journey with New Rocket. And you can ask some of the managed services people like how tough it was to get something past me, because if it wasn't commented, I ended the meeting and said, go do it. And you have to face the customer and say, it's delayed now. And you spoke to it being quick and easy. And it is, if you do it as you go. And sometimes you're a seasoned veteran like we all are, and you learn that the hard way. And I recently had to go through and comment an entire script include. And I'm like, well, there goes a whole day. And it wasn't billable because I was already in there doing something else for them. So if I had done it and followed my own leading practices and my own standards, then I wouldn't have been put into that position. So one other piece, we've got another question coming in saying that it's helping us control a lot of things, but we also have to keep in mind the Integration Hub transactions And without governance around them, they can, go crazy if we don't have that governance in place. And this is something I'm going through right now with a client. They have two departments that need to have Integration Hub Professional, I believe is the middle one. Or standard, whatever the middle one is. And then somebody just yesterday came in and said they needed a spoke and it's only an enterprise. So now when we come back, we are presenting the three options, the value you get out of all of them. And this one's going to be a bit of a challenge because in their roadmap, we've roadmapped till the end of next year because they've done a full capability mapping. They've got strategic governance in place, which is fantastic. But they only have the one need in the next year to have this one spoke that's in enterprise. So we're really going to have a challenge to prove that the business value outweighs the cost of purchasing it, owning it for that long with no plan to use any other spokes, and then to maintain it as well. Obviously, that's my first preference, but it's not my money. So how do you guys handle those budget issues?
It's interesting. So the number of conversations I've got on with customers lately, where a customer is, hey, I want to build every one of my integrations through Integration Hub, and I'm like, well, you do know that there is this thing called transaction cost. Now, will you hit it? Good question to ask, but yeah, there's pretty good limits there. I want to say for professional, what you were talking about, I think it's what 5 million a day or something. It's something crazy like that, but if you're not accounting for it up front, you're going to wind up hitting it and then not knowing you're hitting it. So you've got to be careful when building these. I remember the first call I got into where I told a customer they had, I want to say, a list of 7 to 10 integrations, and they wanted them all built on Integration Hub. And I said, well, you've only got 3 of these that actually have spokes available for them. What's the need for the rest of those to be on Integration Hub? Well, that's the new best thing. Let's build them that way. Well, you could build them outside of Integration Hub, still accomplish the same task, and not have to worry about your transaction costs. So trying to teach that and get that mindset out there, like, yes, Integration Hub is amazing. And ServiceNow, just so if you're listening, I'm not knocking what you're selling. I'm just preaching here to what everybody needs to know, which is, yes, there's some great stuff in there. It's easy. Flow Designer's amazing, everything. But if I have the capability of building integration and not touching my transaction costs, why would I build it on Integration Hub when I can save the customer a little bit with that transactions? Like, say down the road you release a spoke for that same integration I built for them. Now they move over to it. Now they start diving into those. But until then, let them. They should be able. If I'm building it custom anyways, why do I need to use those other functionalities? That's my opinion. That's the Chris opinion. That's not even in my best practice documentation. That's just me saying that's how I do it. I'd be interested, Tej or Will, how y'all would approach that.
Hey man,
Yeah, Tej. Sorry,
Go
we'll get to you after Will. Tej, go ahead. Oh, I think you're muted, Tej.
Yeah, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, I think my connection dropped. I'm not able to hear you guys really well. Sorry, what was the question, Chris? Can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah, we were talking about Integration Hub transactions, and when you're building custom versus spoke, how you approach the scenarios. Do you build everything through Integration Hub no matter what, if that's what the customer's asking, or do you approach a custom integration as, hey, you know what, I've got to focus and worry about your transactional costs that could occur, so let me build these customs outside of, per se, your flow designers and pieces that may intertwine it with Integration Hub. That was kind of where I was talking. I was interested in what yours and Will's thoughts were. Like, do y'all approach it the same way, or do you just say, you want it on Integration Hub, let's build it all on Integration Hub?
Yeah, I think one of the key points is also looking into your licensing, right? I think a lot of times, especially platform owners, don't really look into the fact of what they're licensed to. So maybe having a dashboard, I think ServiceNow has a fantastic dashboard that looks at all of your license metrics, and you can actually see them or monitor them quite frequently. So being able to keep tabs with it quite frequently, that's important. And then also looking at the cost and the budget that's made available to you. If you want to, let's say, if you do notice a lot of these integrations, that's going to cost a lot of transactions, then it's maybe better to have it, either you have the budget for it, or you can build out a custom integration for it, right? So that's actually much better compared to having an integration uh, going through the spokes and then reaching that limit of the transactions. So that's my thought, Chris.
Yeah,
One.
and just a plug real quick for what he was talking about. If you want to monitor your licensing and everything, subscription management, great tool. If you're not using it and you're a customer that's listening to this, you got to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Mr. Coffee.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, Chris. You and I, we used to go kind of round and round about this when it comes to not only just the transaction pieces, but kind of the table management pieces. When ServiceNow shifted to, it costs more for more tables and stuff because people were just doing whatever shenanigans they were doing in the platform by creating custom tables and stuff. But I very much follow the same and prescribe to the same kind of thought process that you do, which is we want to be cost conscious and we want to make sure that we're getting the best benefit of the platform for what we're doing. And sometimes just having to license every little transaction that we're doing doesn't make sense. And if we're working on a really broad scale, like I'll defer back to the federal government, some of those agencies are humongous. So, 5 million transactions a day, when you're thinking about something like the IRS and it's serving 330 million citizens, especially during tax season, you're going to blast 5 million a day. There's no way, right? It's going to torch that really, really quickly. So making sure that we have the best approach to the thing that we're doing, it just requires a little bit of ingenuity, and we follow the same approach on those things. It's the budget conversations are always tricky, right? Because it's never easy to go back to your clients and your customers and say, well, yeah, I mean, we can do that, but it's going to cost you more money because we're not anticipating things like that. They're coming to us as experts and as architects and as partners to be able to guide them in that way down there. So while they might be looking at their entitlements and what they have from a licensing perspective, they don't always know what that means. One, right? I'm not trying to say that it's complicated. Well, ServiceNow licensing is complicated, and it's only getting harder. So helping them navigate that and helping them work through that in a way that works for them is definitely, like, you want to do that as a good counselor for your customers.
Yeah, and that speaks to being that trusted advisor that customers need. We've all been asked to build a Ferrari so the customer can go get groceries.
Yeah.
And I feel that a large part of our role is to provide them with some key factors to consider, understand completely the business outcomes that they're looking to achieve, and then present them with some options with pros and cons to each option. And sometimes a pro or a con could be the cost that's associated with it or the increased licensing. And then let them decide and make that educated decision. And in some cases, you provide your recommendation. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. Even at the CMA level, you've got a clear winner and they're like, nope, build me the Ferrari. I had a customer that I worked with a few years ago that spent over $30,000 to save up like 7 or 8 people 2 clicks in one process that happened a few times a month. So they approved the cost. We went through all of the things like, what could we do with 30 grand? We could do this and this and this and these other things. And they said, nope, take these buttons and simplify them for us. But it was for leadership, so that was the decision that we went with. But at least they knew what they were getting into. And at the end of that, nobody was upset when that invoice came in because they were a part of that decision-making process from the beginning. And I'll flip to another one where I came in midway through, kind of like you did, Chris, and they hadn't covered all of the bases. They hadn't covered all of the impacts of some of these technical decisions that were being made. And a sudden compliance bill was sent over because they were way over licensed. And when I say that, I mean hundreds of licenses were being used. And, then we have to have that meeting with the compliance team and explain it and be like, well, you did install this plugin directly in prod. And that's okay. We sorted it all out. But they were displeased of the whole experience because they kind of went into it without understanding the full impacts of some of the decisions that they were making. And they hadn't really had a trusted advisor in place at that point to guide them through that process, so they knew what they were going to end up with. Well, we've got a few more minutes left, so why don't we do one more round table, and we'll start with you, Chris New, about a couple more tips that you might have related to a successful integration project.
Well, before we go there, I know that this is built on questions, and I actually have an interesting question from my guy, Will. So Will, because he's federal and deals with a lot of federal stuff. So Will, I've run into this a couple of times recently and probably a few times in my past, and I'm interested for somebody who works in that space quite a bit. GCC, we know GCC pretty well. GCC data out is typically a no-no from the GCC world. How do you work? So see, that's what I wanted to see. So I'm interested from your thoughts. How do you work with the customer when it comes to, I'll give you an example. Global customer, they don't want to have to swivel chair between a US instance, a EMEA instance. They want to find a solution. Do you have any ideas on what you do? Is it 100% you have to swivel chair between there? Or are there options that they can explore to connect and only have to work in one instance?
So a lot of times when we're dealing with federal customers, and even this applies to like state and local customers now a lot too. When we're looking at GCC, the Government Community Cloud, which is the FedRAMP instance of ServiceNow, so that it's got some additional security stuff on it. And, for the commercial instance, you have to pay for full disk encryption and those kinds of things. Like the GCC instance comes with all that. And then there are different levels of GCC access where you just have like the FedRAMP instance. You have one that goes through the DISA cap where you have to have through a government connection to get to the platform and those kinds of things. Your PIV card, all that kind of stuff. High on ServiceNow, it's ServiceNow services on the GCC side, so you have to have a PIV or CAC to get into it from that way. There's a lot of extra controls. But from our perspective, data out of the platform isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for us, right, from a security constraints perspective, we're looking at the compliance perspective of that. So the things that we're touching usually all have to have an ATO as well as ServiceNow, the authority to operate. So they've gone through, they've done the assessment and authorization, and the systems that are touching ServiceNow or anything with the federal data in it are also ATO. Now that gets complex a little bit from your logical boundary perspective, but when you can share the data between those systems, as long as they're not disparate impacts, right? If you're going from ServiceNow's high, this other system is low, and this other system is moderate, because everyth's got to kind of be at the same level-ish, right? There's exceptions to that always, but you're able to do that. It's rare. It's rare. I don't think I've seen it where we've touched a non-GCC instance. Even if we have multiple instances in an environment, we just say everybody should be on GCC, right? This is how we solve this problem. Look, you're touching federal data, you're touching government data. There's compliance requirements, there's HIPAA, there's PII, there's PCI, there's security pieces, there's FedRAMP, there's the states have whatever ramp thing that they're going to have, but a lot of them comply to FedRAMP pieces. And so they all want to adhere to those security practices anyways. And so we just say, let them get on a GCC instance. And there's a lot of entities that can do that. Hospitals, energy, your utilities environments, your state and local governments, your federal governments, your healthcare stuff that's not a hospital, police departments, all those different government entities can all leverage GCC environments. Or if they're using federal government data at all, they can touch those things. So, those are ways that we typically deal with it. And normally it's just like, hey, if you're touching government stuff, you need to be in a government's compliance structure.
No, thank you for that, Will. Go ahead, Chris.
No, you go ahead. Finish up.
I was gonna say, unfortunately, I do need to drop. I have a critical meeting I've got to get to, but I appreciate being a part of this panel, and thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your next meeting. Tej, any closing remarks before we end the live stream? And we'll go to Will after that.
Yeah, sure, Chris. I think we spoke briefly about the documentation as well, right? Having quite a bit of details, and even including the coding, making sure that you're leaving comments. One of the things I'd also recommend is to have an integration landscape document. Just make a list of all of the integrations that you have, either with ServiceNow, or if it's part of the enterprise architecture team, then at least make it available, so that this helps you in quite a few ways. One is, let's say, if you're planning to move to a new application or retiring a particular application at an enterprise level, then it makes it much more easier to assess the risk and the complexity that is involved. And also, the other point I wanted to mention as a tip is, don't let your integration, once you set it up, just don't forget about it. Try to revisit it when you do the upgrades, and try to see if there's anything new that's coming up, or if there's new plugin or new enhancement that you can actually leverage. Or maybe, with SAP, I think there's quite a few integrations that's come up recently, especially the integration hub spokes. So customers, or partners that have already done SAP custom integrations, you can think about maybe looking at integration hub spokes.
That's excellent. Mr. Coffee, any closing remarks on your side?
Look, I think, like I said, with integrations, it's definitely best to start simple. You don't have to jump straight into, yeah, we can do this thing and let's custom script this and let's do something funky with trying to pull the data from wherever we're at. Look and see what the easiest way is. If there's a WSDL, or if there's some kind of real quick REST or SOAP option, that's probably going to be your easiest path in there, path of least resistance. If that works, then that's great. The service graph connector is looking at the way that the platform interacts with that, and don't be afraid to look around the specific functionality that you're trying to get to. The question earlier of how do you get greater detail in the configuration, that's a great example of areas where there's probably not going to be one point solution. You're going to have to work around that to create something that pulls in all the details that you want. So when you're looking at integrations, start simple and look for how you can work around the different features or different capabilities to bring in everything that you want to bring in, and then how you're sharing that data across not only the platform and the ecosystem within the platform, but around it. Do you need to share it? One. And two, how are you making sure that you're sharing it safely and securely?
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining. Thanks to Chris New. I know he's already in his other meeting, but thank you, Tej. Thank you, Will, for joining us. So this was episode 2 of the CMA panel for the Americas, where we were discussing integrations. Appreciate everybody joining us with the stream and asking all these great questions. And we do have a thank you saying that we had some pretty valuable insights and that they're looking forward to the next one. So thanks for your time today, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch. I'll see you on the CMA forums.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks.